Hey everyone. So we will be talking about social learning this week. I apologize for the delay. I'm sure many of you understand that this has been a pretty chaotic week, and so I'm just trying to get this up and out there. And this week, a lot of it will be very closely connected to some of the stuff we had already talked about, and really just comes into this view from a different theoretical direction. And so a lot of this will be familiar based on the role plays and some of the different things that we've done already, with just that difference of it focusing on social learning theory as it's originated. So this one will be a little shorter, but I think it'll provide some helpful information when we're working with clients. And so social learning theory comes from Bandura and really kind of focuses around the concept that our learning doesn't have to come from these things like reinforcement or punishment, and that often so much of our learning is done through watching others, through behaviors that we see in others, through our interactions with others. And then also that idea of vicarious learning, where we can repeat a behavior, we can repeat something that we learned based on watching and imitating others. And I think that's something that's very core to counseling training sometimes, where we do shadows or we do these role plays. We do kind of controlled learning and watching of others to take these forward and make it our own. And so the first technique that's covered with social learning would be modeling. And this is something that we've talked about just like kind of like bits and pieces of before, but it's something very core to this model and this concept. And so the idea is that we, like as a counselor or in these different ways, are going to show a client and model a behavior so that they're able to replicate it themselves and take it. And so there's a few different ways that people call this, going from like imitation to observational learning or vicarious learning. And these are all things that I think have come up within these classes, but also you probably see in your jobs, especially if you're working in schools, you'll see a lot of modeling. And I'll provide an example that is uploaded below this that just kind of gives an idea of what that might look like. Um, and it ends up being pretty short because often it tends to be like one specific behavior that you're looking at. So there are several different versions of modeling that we talk about, where overt modeling is that like live, it's in person, it's one or two or more people demonstrating behavior to be learned. And it's pretty effective when it comes to social skills because clients can see those behaviors in real time and ask clarifying questions. They can get some more information, and that can be really helpful when they're learning those behaviors or learning how they want to interact in those times. Where symbolic modeling is more so through just the use of video or audio recordings. And so this does a good job of giving us really kind of like fine-tuned control of the behavior or of the environment or of the situation that's being watched, and then lets it happen so that it can be recorded and reviewed several times. And so this also expands into what we call the self as a model, where we record the client performing or doing that target behavior in the way that they want to do in the future. And so that's something that they can look back at and they can say, okay, hey, like I've done this before. It grows that self-confidence, but it also gives them something to look back on so that they can jump into it in the future themselves. And then covert modeling is kind of in a different section and talks more so about this idea that they are using imagery in their imagining a successful performance of the behavior. And so this can be really good with things like anxiety-provoking situations. We've talked quite a bit in the past about different forms of imagery. And so you can kind of build this in as another form of imagery where they're modeling those behaviors in kind of their internal image. And so we have done so much modeling in this class through the videos we watch. So that would kind of fit within that symbolic modeling, through the role plays that we do together. So that's kind of that overt modeling where we're watching another person doing this and seeing things that we like about it, seeing things that maybe we don't want to like or we don't like about it, or we see growth areas. And so when we talk about implementing modeling, we want to be kind of we want to be intentional when we implement this. Otherwise, it can be chaotic and you're not really getting to what you need to be. So, kind of taking these steps forward can be helpful. So, first is that idea that we find the behavior that we are looking to fill in for that like unwanted behavior. And so this calls it like alternative behaviors. So basically, this is just, hey, here is what we want to try and practice here that can probably either be more effective in this situation or lower your anxiety or make you feel better during that situation. And so we kind of set that out, and then we do some psychoeducation. And I think this is a really important part of most of these techniques, is because we're giving them the education, we're increasing buy-in, and we're giving them understanding of the thing they're getting into. And so hopefully what that does is that lets them understand, and that also lets them feel comfortable within the modeling that they're going to see, so that they feel like it's meant to accomplish something. And so a big piece of this is chunking it. So basically bringing those into smaller parts, making it more manageable. Because if we were going to throw out a really long process, so like let's talk about, let's say we were doing like an arts and crafts, just another form of modeling, and we were showing someone the step by step on how to do it. If we were going to do the entire craft from beginning to end, that would be so much information that it would basically be impossible to go and try and replicate that. And so cutting it down into smaller pieces allows them to look at like these just precise sections and say, okay, let's go ahead and give this a try, and just build that up over time and create a scaffold for them to climb. And then, we get to it where it's like, hey, okay, we've gone through why, we've gone through what we want to put in there, we're breaking it into smaller steps. Let's go ahead and show that target behavior. Let's show them and model it. And then once that's done, you just have a discussion about it. You debrief a little bit, and you continue to see what was useful, what could be what could have some growth, or what they felt like they can or can't do, if there's any issues that come up when it comes to what you're showing out. And so the usefulness of this technique is sometimes set up based on the way that you do it. So live modeling does that really good job, as we talked about earlier, of the personal and social skills, mostly because it does have that ability to have immediate feedback and adjusting that can be done in the moment. So this can allow them to see the natural flow of their interactions, any subtle nonverbals, just kind of give some insight into if they're modeling that behavior or you're modeling that behavior for them. The symbolic modeling allows for that multiple reviews that we talked about earlier. It gives that consistency when it comes to the demonstration, and it's good for problem solving as they're going through the process. Where video modeling, it has shown promise with developmental disabilities, disruptive and aggressive behavior. And a big piece of that is that it's so clear and consistent because it's something that you very much set up and thought through and were intentional in creating. And so we talk about that idea of that selfless model. And so if they're doing a video model of themselves, that has that extra little bit of connection because they're seeing themselves succeed in the situation or the specific behavior that they're doing, and that builds that self-confidence again, while giving really concrete evidence of their success. And that building of self-efficacy can be really important when we talk about things like interpersonal development and social development. And so I have included a few examples of these in our a node that this is attached to. So take a look at that and then one specific example is from inside a school and kind of helping students see what can be helpful. And it's a pretty short one, but I think it does a good job of showing that modeling. And so we're going to kind of move on and expand it. And so behavioral reversal is the idea that we're going to put into these new situations, these new behaviors, or maybe these behaviors that they want to try in situations that they've had trouble with in the past, especially outside of the counseling session where there is more of that safety and more of that control. And so sometimes it can also be helpful for clients who need to become aware of themselves and kind of see how these might look in action. So really, this is that movement between the observation kind of stage of modeling and the action that they take when they rehearse it and they use behavioral rehearsal. And so this, I really see it as the practice place for modeling. So they see it, you have some discussion about it, and then they really put it in place when we talk about behavioral rehearsal. And so it's not always about doing this very specific behavior. It's more about how you might respond to situations or things that they find challenging within it. So a little more flexible. And so behavioral activation typically will kind of run like this. The client will play themselves. The counselor may take the role of person or situation where anxiety is high, or there's specific responses that you're kind of looking for difference. So things like anger and a few others, it could be thrown in as a very flexible kind of way to interact with these. It's just something that you as the counselor and the client are taking an intentional look at to say, okay, here is the roles that we'll be playing in this, where the client plays themselves. And so throughout the behavioral rehearsal, something that you want to do is really emphasize that the client use their like strong and confident voice or the appropriate behavior related to that situation. And a big piece of this is that they're reacting in a way where they can take that and say, okay, I did well. I was able to get it out here. I'm going to do this in real life. And so sometimes that will take the like mode of either, hey, we're using a strong voice to show like independence or to show that we really have a need here, or we have, a feeling statement that gets out something internal, or just an appropriate behavior to something like getting frustrated quickly and we're wanting to either express that or show it in a way that is better than what had happened before. And then we just go back to giving some immediate feedback and talking about what they did well, talking about their strengths, maybe refining what they did if there was something that could have gone smoother, or just letting them know that there's still some growth to be done and there's still some things that we can throw in there that can be helpful. And so a big piece of this will be having the confidence built because they rehearsed it well and they rehearsed it multiple times with us. And so this can be really great for just a wide variety of like presenting problems. And so I think this list does a good job of showing the flexibility of behavioral rehearsal, because we could do it with all of these different presenting issues, but they're going to look a little different for each one. So if we were dealing with like anger or frustration, especially with kids who maybe get in arguments with teachers at school, you can have that behavioral rehearsal real quick and just say, okay, you're going to play you. I'm going to play as your teacher. I'm going to give some possible responses, or I'm going to tell you something that teacher might tell you. And then we're going to use alternative like I responses to express how they're feeling, or we're going to talk about using deep breathing instead of an immediate reaction. And so we're really going to just dive into that specific direction and continue. Where something like depression with someone who's also dealing with like social isolation, they might practice just initiating social interactions with others, saying hi or asking them how they're doing, and just go through some of those like simple conversational skills so they feel more comfortable and the isolation doesn't feel as strongly, or the feelings around their social interactions maybe doesn't feel as strongly negative. So practicing those social interactions, maybe rehearsing responses if they're being invited out. I know when people have depressive feelings or they're feeling depressed in the moment, sometimes it can be so tough to say, okay, hey, I want to go out with friends, just because they either feel anxiety about that, they don't feel like maybe there's a question of worthiness if they should go out with friends, maybe it's a question of energy. And so practicing how to either positively kind of react to that or tell them that they're struggling and that they can't make it out for like that night. And then giving it multiple tries just to kind of throw that practice in there so that they can see how it might go in a few different ways and just build that comfort and self-confidence in their ability to deal with those situations. And then, you will sometimes have them and you say, okay, now we're going to go practice this in real life. There's a situation that might arise that we're going to give this a try. And so this next one that we're going to go to builds this entire thing, I think, up, where modeling is really that, hey, we're going to show it, we're going to kind of see and reflect on it. Behavioral rehearsal is we're going to go through a specific situation, we're going to see reactions, where role play is kind of the full act. It's the difference between the chapter and the section or the whole book. And so this is just building up those levels. And these do tend to be more complex. There's times that we're switching roles as the counselor and as the client, or whatever roles that you're playing within that. And this is something that you guys have done in and out since the beginning of this. So I think these will be more comfortable with you. But I think it's important to remember how it feels as a clinician running this with a real client, because those reactions might be different. There's this built understanding we have in here. And so if we're going to talk about just how you might put this out, again, this is one of those things that we want to be really intentional about our creation of these and how we implement these so that we don't jump into it, something goes slightly wrong, and then we're kind of completely thrown off. And so here are some things that kind of set up the situation so you can better work through this with a client. And so we start with this idea that the encounter is meant to help the client in role playing understand the perspective of another person. So it may be something where it helps them understand the impact of their own behaviors on others. Maybe it's building some emotional intelligence and just building an understanding of how those interactions may go. And so this may be something where you say, okay, if this client is having a conflict with someone there in their life, and so what we're going to do is they're going to play the client, and then I'm going to play as the person on the other side, and then we can switch these up. So it gives them an idea of kind of both sides of that situation and how they might react if they were talking to someone who is exhibiting the same behaviors as they were. And so, we set that up in the beginning. We let them know that's how it's going to go. And then we want to have some sort of quote unquote stage set. So create things in the counseling space that help set that up with either, small physical prompts or environmental cues. And really what this does is it helps increase this reality of the situation so that they feel like it's more than just like this play acting and makes it closer to what they might have in real life. And so when you want to do this, maybe it'll be small but meaningful prompts. So let's say they're having some anxiety about a job interview and they want to role play that a little bit. So what you might do is have either their real resume or CV or whatever, or just a piece of paper that represents it available for them so they can hand it or talk about it or reference it, that kind of thing. And it sets up a more reality of that situation. Or you could always rearrange the furniture to better match the setting they'll be in so that they just have a very kind of real life expression of those scenarios. And then you want to have pieces within the role play where you're discussing their unidentified or unexpressed emotions. And so they're going to be going through their process and there's going to be some internal dialogue going on. And we want to get that out. So time for them to express those underlying thoughts, if they feel like there's any beliefs connected to it, or if there's emotional triggers that are that go off when you talk about what the situation is or what's happening. And so what you might do is you may just pause the role play, ask for their internal reactions, and then take that forward where it builds their self-awareness and ability to express it. But then you as the counselor can also jump in. And with this next part, you do what we call doubling. And so this doubles down on that self-awareness. And so the text gives this example that if you were doing doubling, what you might do is stand behind the client. And as they're going through some of their process or as they're going through a little bit of role play, you repeat those unexpressed feelings that they just told you and put it out there into the world as sort of this voice behind them or voice in the room. And so they can have this external version of those internal thoughts and really confront them in the situation, or at least get that understanding of, oh, okay, I may be reacting this way because of these other thoughts in the background. And so you're going to want to also debrief after this, of course, but that kind of helps set up the situation and lets the client know what they're in for. And so a few things that I think are important to keep in mind are when you're working through someone, especially those with anxiety or you're talking about sensitive topics, have a signal for stopping if they're feeling overwhelmed or they're feeling like they're stuck. And so that might be something as simple as like a hand raise or just, calling off the situation and they're letting you know that they need a break. Another big thing, and I think this goes with everything that we talked about, is that we want to start simple and build to more complex. We don't want to throw a very complex back and forth right there. For the role play, we want to start with a simple conversation or a specific situation and then build from there. And again, as we talked about earlier, building that scaffolding so that they can move from, okay, I'm supposed to do this behavior to I have kind of this catalog of things that I can do, or I can deal with these situations in the moment more comfortably. And then I think using those real life situations is really important. It's gonna resonate more with them if you use those real life situations, and it's going to be usable for them once they get into them. And then I would just say be aware of cultural norms and cultural considerations with your specific client in that moment. is it going to be the same? Is there going to be dynamics? Is there going to be cultural impacts that are different from inside the session to outside? And how might you have that conversation, or is that something that needs to be built in? And so the text gives us several different ways that we can implement this, but the three phases, I think, does a good job of just saying, okay, we have all our things set up. There's this really simple structure where we get the client comfortable, we do some of that psychoeducation, we give some of the uh, just information that they need so they can jump into this. And maybe you do something really small where you just do a back and forth so you get comfortable in that idea of role play because it can be kind of unfamiliar for people. And then you get to the role play, you get to the action, you go through those scenarios, and you hear some of those like unspoken about thoughts. You hear some of their reactions and how they're going through it or how they want to react. And then you debrief afterwards. You talk, you have a conversation, and you go through the situation that was just set up and say, okay, here are the things that worked well. These reactions worked well, or this conversation kind of line went well versus, hey, like I still see there was maybe a lot of frustration or anger or sadness that came in that was hampering our ability to like clearly communicate. And so you go through a really clear process of just, hey, how did that go? What did we learn? And where can we go from there? How do we integrate it into your daily life after that? And so this entire kind of setup that we had today are things that you are going to do as a counselor with individuals, with groups, with families, with couples. These can all kind of be worked in, and it has a really huge range. More than anything, when I talk about things like this that are so broad, the important thing to remember is that you have to be intentional, you have to be specific, and you have to get that buy-in from clients so that they can be in that situation and take that as a learning process and take what they learn and use it in real life versus just this, fun little conversation role play that they got to do 1 week. And then there isn't as much of an expansion or self-awareness building afterwards. And so I'd also end this that these modeling, behavioral rehearsal, and role modeling all very much kind of fit within this same idea. And if you wanted to go through, you start small with the modeling of it, and then you just build up more and more until you get that very active kind of participation within role play. All right, so that is all I have for you guys today, but we will be seeing each other on Wednesday. I know we have a few assignments that are coming up over this weekend, so I wish you all luck on those assignments. And if you guys need anything before we meet next, feel free to shoot me an email, and I will see you all on Wednesday. Thank you.